Hello and welcome to Constellation Interviews for our upcoming conference, October 5th to 8th this year in Virginia Beach. We're so excited. Our website for more information is nasconstellations.org, and our theme for this year is Bridging the Divide, Healing the Personal and Collective Soul. And I'm super excited to interview today a couple of veterans to our Constellations world. Welcome, Emily, Blefeld, and Cohen. How are you guys?
Good.
Good.
To see you, Linda.
Nice to see you. I'll just mention that their talk is From Oppression to Freedom, Dismantling the Master's House in the Healer's Heart. This sounds very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a little bit of information about your presentation. Well, actually a lot of information about your presentation.
Great. Thanks, Linda. We're really glad to have this chance to talk to you and create this for people who are interested in the conference. We're really excited to be there. We've the conferences are just a great way for people in Constellations community and people that are new to Constellations to come and meet, to see so many different presentations and to really get an in-depth experience of what this work is about and how the impact it can have. And it's I really appreciate you and all the organizers for putting it together this year.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much also for putting these videos together and promoting the conference. I too feel the conference and the intensives have been really instrumental in growing my practice and supporting kind of networking endeavors and collaborations with other practitioners across all modalities, and to really get a feel for ways to use constellations in all kinds of different ways. There's like there's a varied evolution of how the work is being brought into to bridge with other modalities. So I love the title of the conference, and I think I've seen it occur across the field, and I think the conference has a big part of that. So I appreciate it.
Oh, our pleasure. And you can feel the knowing field vibrating right now. Or I feel it humming. Maybe it's because I'm doing all these videos, but it's a lot of fun. Yes. Yeah. So tell us about your workshop.
Well, what we're working with constellations with individuals, and people come to us, they have particular personal issues that they want to look at, but we find that once those issues get cleared, we usually do a couple of constellations and people have the experience that there's been a big release for them in their heart and in their capacity for work and relationships and their own emotional being. And that then they start to come into contact with the larger fields that surround us, collective fields of society and culture and nationality and ethnicity. And when we come into contact with that, we see that there's a real mirroring between what's at the personal and what's in the collective. And so for this particular workshop, we really want to focus on the collective field because it's a question a lot of people have, how to work with constellations and collective fields. And it's not that easy. It's not an easy transposition between personal constellations to collective constellations. And so we wanted to share some tools that we've discovered of how to work with the collective using constellations.
We also wanted to work with introducing how internalized oppression is showing up in facilitation, in leadership, in initiatives. So for many of us who are looking to impact not only the personal fields of our clients, but also the collective fields, almost holding trauma as a symptom of oppression and looking at how to not only treat transgenerational trauma, but treat oppression as a whole. What we find is occurring is that the oppression that lives within the facilitator, that the areas that, that inner critic that shows up, or the one who wants to kind of take over and control the initiative of whatever it is you're trying to bring forward, that there's a way where we want to look at the oppressive symptoms that show up inside, that tear us down, that tear down the movements, that almost introduce the polarity of what it is we're seeking to change in the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how would you explain a little bit for a new person coming into Constellations? They know very little.
Well, the model that we're working from, as we're working with constellations, is 3 dimensions of consciousness. That's the map that we're using. It's not an accurate description of any reality, but it is an effective map that we can use to explore our own consciousness, our own emotional body, mental, relationships, and also physical. And the way we're working with these 3 dimensions in a simple way is just the first dimension is just ordinary reality. It's a reality that we all exist in. That's just our everyday. The second dimension is the consciousness of life. It's the heartbeat, it's the pulse that flows through generations. When you think about your pulse and ask how old is it, it could be 1 billion years old, literally, that it just keeps extending itself. It doesn't actually begin at any point. It just extends. And that you could think about an energetic or emotional umbilical cord that also continues to flow through generations, like a vine that we're fruit that grow on a long vine that goes back almost to infinity. And that's what we're calling second dimension consciousness, is consciousness of life. And it appears as a consciousness of ancestors when we're working with it practically, that the memories, emotions, traumatic events, disruptions of our grandparents and great-grandparents remain alive in us up to 7 generations of memory and history. And constellations are a tool to really, in a very specific way, make contact and heal our relationship between the living and the ancestors, and also between the ancestors and the living.
And for some that might not even think, oh, I want to do work with ancestors, or I'm interested in my lineage, or some that might not know anything about their lineage, constellations, that the entry point is typically that somebody comes in with some issue, some pattern, some disruption or disturbance in their life. We call it kind of the burden that weighs them down, the block that stands in front of them as they're trying to move forward and open and manifest something, or this restraint that holds them back. That there's some way that as that shows up in your life, we look at it as, maybe experiences we've had in the last 10 years, maybe, remnants of our childhood. And you might have done years of therapy on it. You might have tried all different sorts of, emotional, spiritual, or physical healing to try to release some of those disturbances. And constellations are phenomenal for those that persist, that don't quite go away, that show up in their different forms, rear their head in different ways in your life. And what we're looking at is tracing the symptom back as many generations as is needed to find who is that symptom, who experienced that same pain, that same disturbance in a different form in a different generation, and how to honor that ancestor and release whatever the disturbance is, and in a way replace it. There's a replacing the trouble or the disturbance with love and blessing.
Excellent. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what's neat about this is they don't really have to know of the incidents in the past, do they? They can come with just a symptom and present, I feel blocked with my career, I feel blocked with my marriage, or something, health.
And sometimes it's the intention in and of itself. It might be that you have this grand intention as a change agent or an activist in the world to bring something forward, to move it forward, to create change, and you're actually in the flow in your life, but your intention isn't moving. You cannot find a way forward. And we'll oftentimes trace intentions as also being inherited. Who before you held this same intention and wanted this for their world, their life, their reality and experience, and how can you honor where it comes from? It's the legacy of what you're holding as you're moving forward, and then release whatever it is that's holding you back. But yeah, it's profound how one can open their organs of perception in their body and sense, and how perfect strangers in the room might step in and feel the consciousness of those that came before them without knowing anything about them.
These pathways of consciousness on the second dimension, the way we're working on them they're very real. So, we are, from our experience, the data that we're working from really confirms that consciousness survives death, that there is consciousness that remains after bodily death, and it remains in relationship with the living. And there's a way that individual, the more they experience themselves cut off or even kind of triggered by that statement, that that the more disconnection there is, actually, the greater the call for healing. So someone who is really cut off from their mother, or never knew their father, or has just a bad story about their father, or a sibling estrangement, or maybe their mother and her sister never spoke, or there was a brother who disappeared, that a scar forms around those wounds, and the scar kind of tells a message. Well, I'm not a scar. I'm moving on with my life. But there actually continues to be an impact from those disconnections. And this way that we're able to open the pathway of consciousness in this organ of perception in the core of our body, you could open to it and transmit and receive information from this knowing field. And the field is always in the service of healing. It's healing means to connect what belongs together but has been disconnected.
Lovely, lovely. Well, this is exciting. And something else for our lip watchers is something that you can't speak about is also a sign of a wound that needs to come out. And this is a nice, gentle process. Yeah.
And then I just want to mention also third dimension consciousness. I said we're working with 3 dimensions. So the third dimension is the consciousness beyond human scale and form. It's spirit consciousness, it's archetypes and symbols. So when you trace back beyond 7 generations, there continues to be an imprint, but it stops being a family imprint and becomes a collective imprint. And you see it with nationalities, with ethnic groups. So, for instance, in certainly in African American families, the family history could go 7 generations, but the traumatic wound of oppression, of the enslavement of African Americans going back centuries, that moves into what we call third dimension consciousness. And you see it, with all ethnicities, whether Jewish or Chinese, immigrant populations, the children of slave owners, the children of pioneers that may have 10 or 12 generations, but there's a connection to conquest and colonialization that becomes a third dimension element. Colonialization is not personal to any particular family, but it is active in these fields of consciousness, and it brings us into the collective spaces. So in the collective is where you meet these larger symbolic or archetype forces, and we can see that they, remain very active in the states today. Our national conversation is very much about the shadow of the experience of the United States of enslavement and genocide of the Native people, and the way that our economy has built itself on immigrants, and how in the national conversation the shadow of that history is now very much alive in this country and creating some real divides that we want to be looking at.
We want to not only look at it on a collective level, but looking at it on an individual level. So when we get into these spaces, sometimes we're looking at the themes that as a whole our culture is embracing and how they live within us. And other times we're looking at the call of the earth and our place in the larger matrix of existence in the cosmos. So it depends on what the actual intention is that we set up in the field or we work with in the field. But our title, From Oppression to Freedom, Dismantling the Master's House in the Healer's Heart, is really about looking at your own inner master and how it's working with you, how it can be used to support you, and how it's kind of dismantling your own power if it's being used against you. So we're looking at kind of working with the themes of oppression and the themes of those that are oppressed, that they both actually live in our hearts and in our fate and in the family inheritance, and how to understand it, to free yourself so you can live in this world as a beacon of hope and change and create a new way of being.
Oh, this is going to be such an awesome session
Mm-hmm.
to examine both aspects of individual and collective is going to be very powerful.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, we're inviting in our circles, we're inviting in activists, artists, healers of all kinds, people with big projects who are looking at, how can I influence the world? How can I have an impact in a bigger way than just within a little small circle that they might be involved with family and work, but they're looking to create something new that is going to make a real impact into some of these questions. And then what they find is that as soon as they even name the intention, the obstacle, the polarity to that will activate in their heart. So if they're interested in fighting racism within their community, they will find that their own relationship, the own shadow of racism that lives within them, perhaps they had a grandfather or a great-grandfather that was involved in slave trading or profited from racism in some way, and that becomes active in them, so that their own project becomes tangled up in a conflict within their own being. And so we're actually looking at how we can come into contact with the polarity, the shadow that activates just from naming the intention or taking the first step forward, and to clear that and to move that obstacle and turn it into a resource that actually frees them and also helps energize them in their movement forward.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. Yes. That's interesting, because I often do work with people who want to lose weight. And of course, the minute you say diet, you want to reach for a bag of chips or an ice cream cone.
Exactly.
That's an interesting
That's
description. Thank you.
The question we would ask is, who is it that's showing up to kind of compound the forms of oppression internalized in that person's body, and then how can we be in service to healing not only the living but the dead as well, and transmute that burden, block, restraint, whatever it is, into a blessing.
Mm-hmm. There was that study in Sweden of type 2 diabetics, who had tendency to overeat, and they were able to correlate those individuals that their grandparents experienced famine years in this particular village in Sweden, where they were able to document the feast and famine years. And at the time of conception and pregnancy of their grandparents, they were correlated to famine years. And then it actually turned on a gene switch for a very active appetite. And that then carried through the generation, so that the grandchildren inherited a gene for having a overactive appetite. So when you're looking at overeating, you can actually go back, and famine will be in the field, and the suffering of those hungry ancestors and their desire to eat. And there's a way that bag of chips. So when the person declares their intention to lose weight, they feel like they want to reach for a bag of chips. It's actually the grandparent, the hungry grandparent, who's famished, who is activated and is saying, "Feed me, don't starve me."
Right.
And then the inner critic that comes in that feels, just horrible about themselves afterwards for eating the food has something to do with what created the famine. Where is the oppression? Who was there? That starved the ancestor. So there's you're activating all three. That which the oppression that came in to create the famine, the ancestors who were famished, and and this feeling of desire to change, desire to live in a healthy way.
Right, because often in famine situations, there are people who are very well fed in the vicinity of those who are starving. And you could see it in Ireland, Ukraine, in China, that there were very well-fed individuals and communities surrounding or adjacent to the starving communities. And to those well-fed communities blamed the ones who were starving. So it's an instrument of oppression. It's like, well, it's your own damn fault, or you're the wrong religion, or you're the wrong ethnicity, or whatever it is. And so internalized in that also is a self-blaming mechanism that Emily's speaking to, that comes in and says, well, it's your own fault if you're overweight or you're underweight or whatever it is. There's a self-blaming that comes in. That's a message also that is coming through this generational patterns.
And also in the Holocaust, or in many other places where people are starved, there's those that are starving, creating the starvation or holding back the food, and using it as a form of punishment. Also in military families, you'll see this often as, part of it's inherited, that experience of trauma to get the information, from prisoners of war. So there's you always want to look at, what's the third party in it as well. Not just the ancestor, but the root cause that created that starvation, and the societal rifts. Because oftentimes, and with weight issues, you look at somebody else and you want to be like them. There's a comparison. There's like an other to what you're aspiring to be, and typically there's an other in the ancestral dynamic as well.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Yes, I love this.
Thanks for the example. That was great, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really neat to see someone focusing on the three. So the oppression part of the third party is very, very interesting. Nice new dynamic there. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I thank you very much for your time. This has been amazing. I haven't even kept track of the time.
Thanks so much, Linda.
Is there anything else that you guys can mention?
I think if people want to learn about us, they can come to our website, seeingwithyourheart.com. You can find us there, and we do free consults. Anybody wants to have a conversation with us, learn more about what we're doing or how you might be able to interact. There's a link right there on the website. You can just sign up for a free consult. It's very simple to do, and we'd love to talk to you. And we're looking forward to seeing you, Linda, and everyone, new friends and old friends at the conference.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys getting together and having this conversation with us. I'm sure it's going to generate some buzz, and your workshop will be well attended for extra good information here. Yes. So thanks again. And to our watchers, do check out the website for both Dan and Emily, as well as the conference, nasconstellations.org. Thanks for your time today. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks so much, Linda.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.